We're starting soon. Martha is here. Epic. We're just going to pause this, pop you out on the chat, find our live stream. Oh, that's fine. Why don't just try and, how do you make this smaller? So that's a face for making things smaller on the computer screen. Just for our watching audience. We'll come out here. First things really, it's just a really lovely evening. Okay, this is what happens. It's been a welcome to XL Catlin Arctic Live. I'm Jamie.
I'm shorter than Jamie. I'm Bianca.
And the snow is a bit slippy today, but it's just a really beautiful evening. And you can see, I think if we get out of the way and we sort of give you a sort of look that way, that's the view at the moment. That's to the mountains right at the back is about 20 miles, 30 kilometers. And it's just a really calm evening. We've had a fairly, I think the technical term is manky day, so big wet snow that has made getting around fairly difficult and working outside unpleasant. I don't know about you, I didn't really bring any waterproof clothing, so big wet snow makes me end up sort of feeling quite soggy after working in that for a while.
I brought lots of waterproof clothing.
All my Arctic gear isn't waterproof because it's supposed to be dry and not wet up here. So that's not really working out. But great to have a couple of you on board now. We've got Marta and we've got Joanna. Great. Hi from Connecticut. Hi from the Arctic. Lovely to have you on board. So the sequence that we're going through really at the moment is to have a sort of Q&A, so people logging into YouTube and then typing up the questions, and then that means Bianca and myself can start to answer them right here from the Arctic. Just got a wave from Nick, the station manager, coming to check out to see where everybody was. And hi from London. Hi, Digital Explorer. How are you? So just to let you know, on our beautiful evening, it's probably down to -4-y about the moment. About -4.
Yeah, it's still pretty warm here.
Really warm. As you can see, we're both in t-shirts and shorts.
It's warm for the Arctic. We've had crazy weather fluctuations, temperature fluctuations over the last week. On the weekend, it was -53 with wind chill, and today it's 0, and then it goes back down to -20 on Thursday. So it's really just this giant yo-yo as these weather patterns come through. So it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, and Nick was saying earlier that massive fluctuation that we're getting is really because of lack of sea ice. But the sea ice would keep everything nice and sort of cold.
Yeah, there's lots of people who've been trying to figure out what's going on with the jet stream right now. It seems like it's making much bigger waves, and so those bigger waves draw warm air up into the Arctic and bring Arctic air down to the temperate latitudes, and so it seems like everybody's having kind of crazy weather.
Things it's more Arctic in New York today than it is in, or maybe even Connecticut. We've got Joanna, who may be able to tell us whether the East Coast is it more blizzardy and colder on the East Coast of the US than it is here at 79 degrees north in the northernmost settlement on the planet. It's very, very nice. And you'll find a DEHQ, and we have some questions coming through. Well, lovely, Helen, to hear from you. It's all very nice up here too. I just gonna do myself up a bit and put some gloves on, because holding metally sort of things, and having said it's warm, there's a little bit of a breeze and the sun's down.
Yeah, it is. I just went out for a ski, which was really lovely.
Oh, you just went for ski?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, we skied over to the Amundsen. There's a pole over there that was where Amundsen's airship was tethered when it went across the North Pole to Alaska. So we went and checked that out. about the same as where you are. Snowing now for 6 or 8 hours. Very sleety. Oh, that doesn't sound so great. How was Svalbard discovered? I don't actually know how Svalbard was discovered. Do you know how
discovered in
Svalbard was discovered?
1596
Okay.
by Mr. Barents, whose first name I can never remember. And in honour of his great discovery, there's a bar called the Barents Bar in Longyearbyen, which you've been to. So I'm also not entirely sure, but it was Barents who came up here and found or discovered Svalbard. There weren't any indigenous people here, unlike other parts of the Arctic.
What is the most dangerous part of your job? Perhaps you can both say a few words about yourselves. Oh, sure. Well, I'm a scientist at the British Antarctic Survey. I've been working in the Arctic since 1998, which is apparently 19 years. I had some kids calculate that for me yesterday. And I also work in the Antarctic. The most dangerous part of the job? Oh, I don't really know. I travel a lot on ice and in strange planes and helicopters and things like that. Perhaps that's the most dangerous. It's probably more just the conditions that you're working in, cold temperatures and doing it for a long period of time. That's kind of the most dangerous part.
My name's Jamie, and I am an expedition educator, and I've been working on polar projects since 2009, so for 8 years. And I would say that danger is a different way of looking at it. From how I think people look at it when they're on expedition, you have risks like you have in everyday life. There are risks crossing the road, eating old chicken, whatever you come across. I mean, there are these risks that we take, and I think you probably take far more care. And when I go out for a walk at home, I don't take a rifle, a flare gun, a satellite phone, spare clothing, a thermos full of water, spare food, a flare pistol, and there are more risks probably here, but you also take far more precaution. So I think someone said that music festivals are more dangerous than a well-organized expedition.
I'd believe it. Yeah. Do you think it's possible that new species will be discovered in the Arctic? Absolutely. I think we've found probably most of the big ones, but there's lots of small things that you can't necessarily see or that you can barely see that are still being named and still being discovered, and so there's lots of room for exploration.
What would you name a new species if you found a new species?
You're supposed to name it after the person that you work with, your mentor.
Who's your mentor?
Oh, geez. Well, probably none of them are watching right now. So
but this is going to be up on live for posterity. So yeah,
that's true. No, I don't really know. I mean, you can also name it after the geographic location that you found it. So you name it usually after your mentor or where it was found or some attribute that it has.
Okay. For all participants, all the kids in the class attending can now ask questions about science, environment, climate change, and polar bears and such. Well, not much about polar bears. How many times have you been asked about polar bears during Arctic Live 2017?
At least once, or maybe at least twice in every classroom that I've talked to. So we're getting on, 7 days maybe that I've been Skyping with classes, and 7 a day. So yeah.
So unfortunately, fortunately, there have been no close encounters with polar bears to date. So that's a good thing on the danger front, a bad thing on the chat front on the polar bears. But one of the great things to know about polar bears in Svalbard especially is that the population has rebounded after hunting was banned, so that we'll talk about all these issues facing species around the world and some very simple actions that we can all take to help those numbers rise. And that is in the context of the fact there's less sea ice and life's a bit trickier. But we have good news, some good news.
What sort of research are we doing here? We're here with some glaciologists from the University of Aberystwyth in Wales, and they are looking at the inside of the glacier. They're looking at meltwater channels and trying to describe and map these meltwater channels. And so what we've been doing is going up onto the glacier, actually under the glacier, through these channels that are basically like ice caves, and walking in. And there's one of the researchers has this amazing scanner that basically maps the whole inside of these meltwater channels so they can see how they're changing over time and how the glacier behaves.
Fantastic. So I'm also standing on a higher lump of snow than you, which is very unfair.
Jamie's a lot taller than me.
Where are we? What do the skies look like at night? Mainly cloudy at the moment. Very sorry to say. We have seen the stars a few times. The very cool thing here is that the plough, Ursa Major, the Great Bear, had the end of that panhandle points towards the North Star, and that's pretty well sort of straight up overhead. So it's quite fun that the North Star is overhead. That's one of the fun things. But looking at skies, we're just going to have a quick sky watch. There we go. Hopefully tonight could be a Milky Way aurora borealis type evening. So fingers crossed.
Jamie's saying that, but he hasn't actually looked over the other side of the, the valley. There's a big black bank of clouds.
Aurora, when they're here, are over in this way, where there's some clouds, but they might move. I've felt positive mental aurora attitude on this one.
Why do you think polar bears are so important? What about copepods? Well, that's a great question. Copepods are not what we would call a charismatic megafauna. Polar bears are sort of one of those emblematic species of the Arctic. And copepods are actually just as interesting and just as important as polar bears. They're a huge part of the food chain. Everybody eats them in the Arctic. They're sort of the favorite food. So yeah, I do think I think copepods are just as important as polar bears. They're just maybe a little less.
Well, I think there's the ecological argument. Is an apex? How important is an apex predator in a food web?
Yeah. You're asking me.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very important, and they sort of balance the food web, and so yeah, they're a critical part.
So talking about those two, you've got an apex predator, the polar bear at the top of the food chain, and then down near the bottom, a primary consumer really is a copepod, which really really important because it turns copepod. For those who don't know, quick copepod background. It's small crustacean, about the size of your pinky fingernail. The big ones that we'll find in the fjord, the Calanus, that are quite common up here. And they eat the algae and really provide that sort of basic proteins for bigger forms of life. So as Bianca was saying, that then allows everything bigger than your pinky fingernail to sort of grow and survive in these waters. And of course, as we all know, it's the most abundant animal on the planet, with about 1,500 billion copepods in the world's oceans. Yeah, I think it's 1,347 billion. Roughly. That's a back of a menu calculation done in Resolute Bay many moons ago.
Oh,
yeah,
neat.
What happens if polar bears disappear? There are no more polar bears. I mean, what kind of imbalances might we see in the ecosystem?
Well, you get sort of trophic cascades usually in ecosystems. So if one thing, either at the bottom of the food chain or the top of the food chain, disappears, then you get kind of this cascading effect through all the ecosystem. And so you could probably expect that with polar bears, although there's lots of things that can fill those niches, but maybe not at the very top like polar bear. But I'm not so sure that the polar bears will disappear. Obviously, there's some population questions right now, and with climate change, they have trouble without sea ice, and it's hard to catch seals. But at the same time, polar bears have lived through previous warm climates as well, and so they're certainly able to change the way that they behave in order to move into different niches. The question is whether or not hunting and other pressures like that will alter population dynamics.
Do you think it's right that we focus so much on these charismatic megafauna when especially for those organizations sort of, looking to capture the sort of popular imagination and the changes that are happening here?
Well, I think,
or not right, probably what are the sort of like benefits and the sort of drawbacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that polar bears really are charismatic, and so people are really excited about, people think they're cute and people want to know more about them, and they're scary, and so there's a whole lot of appeal to polar bears. So as a kind of emblematic species of climate change, they're great because everybody's really interested in polar bears and can kind of identify with it. On the other hand, it kind of makes it so that it's a very simple thing, and so there's lots of people who have pictures of open water and a little bit of ice flow, and oh no, the polar bears are disappearing. And so I think it's much more complicated than that, and there's many more things that will be affected by climate change as well as polar bears.
We hope it's an easy way in to get your interest, and then from there it's a gateway. Gateway animal
to understanding climate change and
to understanding okay, brilliant. But really to encourage people to move beyond the polar bear.
What do we eat?
Reindeer stew tonight.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
we're having reindeer tonight.
Biscuits, scrambled eggs, chicken and rice, and reindeer stew is mainly today's menu. We're very, very lucky over this way. Kings Bay, which was the mining company, the state-owned mining company that is now a science support company, have a central mess canteen for all the scientists who are up here, and so that we're very lucky to have great food from there, and very delicious.
Lucy in Washington wants to know what's the most important thing that keeps you motivated doing this kind of work in an extreme environment. For me, there's two things. One, it's incredibly beautiful here, and it's pretty much incredibly beautiful anywhere you go in the Arctic.
I'm going to take a photograph because it's just of you on this amazing.
Okay.
Otherwise, we won't have the.
So it's really beautiful, and it's beautiful everywhere. And when you go around the corner or go up on the glacier, it's really just a staggeringly beautiful landscape. So that always keeps it interesting. I think from the work end, it's you're always feeling like you're discovering things. And the kind of work that I do, kind of going back in the past and trying to figure out what the environment was like, there's always the sense that you're going to discover something new. And I mean, even for the people who work on the glaciers, you're finding these amazing meltwater caves and really kind of fantastic features. And because so few people work in the Arctic, there's still so many things that are new to discover, and we don't really know how it's changing that well, and so we're trying to figure that out. And so there's just so much room for discovery. So it's kind of those two things, the beauty and the sense of discovery. How do you spend free time? I just went for a ski this afternoon, which is fabulous. It's really fluffy, nice new snow here, and you can't go very far without a rifle. So I kind of did a tour around town, but it's really it's a pretty great way to kind of get out, get a little bit of fresh air, and the landscape around. What one thing you learned that surprised and perhaps made you think about things differently? Well, the work I do, I work on lakes in the Arctic, and I take lake sediment cores. And so one of the things that we've been doing is trying to figure out how the environment has changed for several thousand years. And the crazy thing is all of these lakes in the Arctic have changed so much in the last 80 years that so many of them are not really the same lake that they used to be. So every lake that we've gone into, we basically found a major change. And that's been really surprising. And I don't think really anybody thought that we would find such huge ecological changes from climate warming so soon, and obviously in these lakes. Could I describe a day in my life? Kids are curious to find out what it's like to be a quaternary paleoecologist. Well, it's a lot of syllables. Basically, when I'm in the field, I go onto lakes and I take lake sediment cores. And it's sort of like if you get a glass and a straw and you stick your straw into the glass and you stick your thumb on the top, you can pull up the sort of column of liquid in the glass. We do the same thing with lake sediment cores. So we go to a lake and we stick down basically a straw or a core and we pull up the sediment. And in the sediment is basically everything that's fallen into the lake or lived in the lake or lives around the lake. And so you can find pollen and you can find algae and you can find insects and you can find basically little sort of traces of everything that's happened in the landscape. And so what I do is I pick those apart and I try to find out how the landscape has changed and how the environment has changed and whether or not that's related to climate warming. So that's kind of the day in the field, and also a day in Cambridge is mostly at the microscope or at the computer trying to figure out what all these things mean. Working on recovering records of past climates from the sub-Antarctic islands, what have you discovered? That's still ongoing. That's what we're working on.
Whilst you go through these
Right
testing
now.
questions.
Yes. What we're working on is actually trying to figure out how the wind has changed in the sub-Antarctic. So each of these islands in the sub-Antarctic is kind of sitting in the middle of this westerly wind belt. And the winds are so strong in the Southern Ocean, they're kind of legendary. And so what they do is they blow salt spray onto the western sides of all these islands. So actually the western sides of the islands are quite salty and their lakes are salty. And so what we can do is take cores and look at the algae, and the algae tells us over time how the salinity has changed, and that tells us how the wind has changed. And so from all these different sub-Antarctic islands, we've been collecting cores, and we have records now that are going back 15,000 years to tell us how the winds have changed, which is kind of neat. Yeah, so I don't really, things have changed, but I'm still working on trying to figure out how it all fits together. Could you describe these changes? How can you tell the lake has changed? Are animals adapting to the changing environment? That's a great question. The lakes mostly in the Arctic have changed because of the lake ice has basically come off. One lake that I've worked on, and the northernmost lake in the world actually in northern Greenland, we see that the lake was pretty much frozen throughout the year up until sort of for 3,000 years up until about 1920. And then the algae started growing in the lake, and you can see these really big changes in the ecology of the lake. So you get more algae and you get different kinds of algae, and they're basically showing that the ice has come off. So that's kind of what we see. And then, those changes in the algae are then transferred through the food web and through the ecosystem. So really what we're looking at, it's kind of like, people talk about the Arctic as being like the first warning sign of climate change. When we look at the algae in the lake, it's kind of like the first warning sign of changes in the sort of larger ecosystem.
You want a break there? What is the coldest temperature here? Apparently the coldest recorded temperature on Svalbard, ambient temperature, is -43. But that's only because there wasn't a thermometer to record a really cold temperature that Nick said he had on one of his trips, which was down, I think, -48, if not further below. And the warmest temperature recorded on Svalbard is 19.6 degrees.
Really? In
Celsius.
Longyearbyen?
Somewhere. So... A question from Lily: what happens if you get stuck in the snow during an expedition? You kind of have to unstick yourself, or be with people who are going to help you get unstuck, or call people to come and unstick you, or it's a fairly terminal in sticking.
Yeah, you always go on an expedition with lots of people, or at least more than one person. And so if you get stuck, you can always get somebody else to help you. And so that's kind of a critical thing, is everybody helping each other out.
And while we're traveling around here, we've got radios. We're not on our own.
Yeah. I think I exhausted everybody with the paleo.
Yeah, the paleoecology, but that was great. I mean, all you need is a straw and a cupcake. No, or a straw. That's more sort of sediment coring. Jamie, what's the best thing about being on an expedition? Sleep, catching up on sleep, wonderful. It used to be the other way around. I was speaking to friends who said, when you have children, you come on an expedition to catch up on sleep, especially when they're young, rather than the other way around, where you sort of get back from an expedition and recover. I think it's the people and the light, especially up here. We love paleoecologists. There you go. There's now going to be all these people, sort of, little paleoecologists.
Yeah, wanting to be paleoecologists.
Yeah,
that'd
exactly.
be cool.
What would be your logo for paleoecology? I mean, is a sediment core. You could have a stripy t-shirt with a different layers in it.
Yeah, you could. Well, usually at conferences they come up with little things, but none of them are.
Okay, so please, could we have someone? There must be a wonderfully talented young person watching, very creative, come up with a new logo for paleoecology to make it more friendly to younger paleoecologists or aspiring paleoecologists.
Right, the gateway to paleoecology.
The polar bear of the polar ecology world.
What do you do when you're ill? That's a great question. Most people in the field on expeditions have first aid training. So everybody has a little bit of knowledge. And then you kind of take care of each other. Usually the germs are all handed around in the first several days or the first week. And then after that, everybody's pretty healthy. But yeah.
The other thing is that if it's cold enough, then the germs die or go into hibernation. We've had one trip where it never got above the temperature of a freezer, so the germs weren't around too much. It's relying on the rest of your team. Normally, you have phone backup. On previous expeditions, we've had a medical expedition doctor on 24-hour sort of speed dial, as it were.
Yeah,
if we need to
get
hold.
Yeah, we're in the Antarctic. Yeah.
But no doctor near you.
No.
There's a rather. When I did my sort of polar first aid course, they told the story of a Russian-based doctor in the 1950s who took his own appendix out using a mirror just to see where he's operating.
Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to get quite that far.
Well, Nick, who runs the station here, was saying that he had to set his own broken leg.
Yes.
Once, which would be, I think, quite a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would hurt a little bit.
Could you tell us some stories about your interactions with other researchers there?
No, I don't think they're not suitable for YouTube. I think it's the easiest way of putting that. No, they're great. It's either quite in depth, sort of nerdy, scientific, or sort of general chit chat and sharing stories. And we're not really in a place to share other people's private stories.
Yeah, this is a really international station. I mean, village. There's 11 research stations here, so it's hugely international, which is really neat. And so there's a nice spirit of cooperation and scientific inquiry that sort of crosses international boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. What do you talk about when you all gather in the UK research station?
Usually we listen to the stories of the station manager who's been working in the Arctic and the Antarctic for 42 years now, and he remembers every single name of every person that he's ever worked with. So we've really enjoyed listening to his pretty nutty stories mostly about early Antarctic days.
Absolutely fantastic. What do you discover in the glacier? It's not so much as a discovering in the glacier as a mapping of it. No one has ever properly mapped this ice cave, and to understand how the inside of a glacier works, there's two ways you can look at it. I mean, we can look at the outside of a glacier almost from satellite pictures, but for the inside, you either need ground penetrating radar, which you drag over the top of a glacier, or you need to get inside it and use whatever type of measurements you wish, but using a laser scanner gives you a really detailed picture of the inside of a glacier and how it might work. So that's the big discovery, is being able to actually get in this and map it for the first time ever.
Yeah.
When people say everywhere's been mapped, well, until a week ago, the inside of this glacier hadn't, and now it has.
Still some mapping to be done.
Still some mapping to be done.
Do you have any special training before you travel to the Arctic? Yeah, we get a lot of training through work, through the British Antarctic Survey, and Jamie probably has it from a different organization. But everybody gets first aid training. That's kind of the first critical piece. And then actually we get a lot while we're here. So if you don't know how to drive a snowmobile, you get taught that. You get taught how to safely look after a rifle and be safe with a rifle. You get taught how to shoot a rifle, how to interpret polar bear behavior, which is really important. You learn how to work on a glacier and how to work in a glacier and how to work safely around ice.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. There's a lot of sort of, it's not always that sort of formal mentoring, but it's always the coaching. No, I mean, formal training. I mean, it's more mentoring and coaching and just sort of having sort of really experienced
sort
people
of like
with you.
an apprenticeship in a way. You learn these things over time and kind of pass them on to the next generation. So there's no like, maybe there is, but there's no real Arctic school where you.
No, but it's great having people here who've been in the polar regions. I mean, you've been for nearly 20 years now, and Nick for sort of 40, and Katrin for a long time as well.
Yeah. Question from Matthew: what was the most important experiment that you have ever done in the Arctic? Is that for me?
Yeah, I've managed to mess up some experiments in the Arctic, so I can do the next one.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I've necessarily done any experiments. I've done a lot of research in the Arctic, and I think the most important stuff has really been the work that I've done around Greenland. People didn't really know how Greenland changed, or the climate of Greenland on the coast changed until quite recently. So I've been kind of helping to piece together how the history of the coast of Greenland has changed over time and how it's responded to climate change, which has been neat because it involves lots of archaeological sort of interactions with people who traveled around the coast and with the people who live there now, sort of figuring out what the future looks like. So that's been really neat.
We had to have someone evacuated from a field site who was looking at marine snow, so the extra sugars that are exuded by algae and on the bottom of the sea ice, which required filtering marine snow through those sort of plastic or ceramic filters in a tent at minus whatever.
You got a frozen hand.
And frozen hands, and over, I think I may have, my first few tries with the vacuum pump were over frozen, over filtered. So I might have just squished some samples up there.
Or he could have been just trying to avoid filtering, because that's really just a terribly boring job.
Okay, so see, he dreamt up an evacuation need, so to leave the communications manager doing all the filtering.
Yeah.
Okay, now I know what's happened. Now I know what happened.
Thank you for answering children's questions. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Martha. Well, I think are we nearing the end of this amazing call? Again, I love these. It's a beautiful evening. So we might just sort of say goodbye shortly, but not before answering this incredibly important question. How can you become a polar explorer? Now, I think the first thing I would say is that polar explorers for me aren't the people who you see on the front of newspapers who walk a long way across big bits of white. I think they're the scientists who uncover or who sort of increase our understanding more of these regions. I think those are the true explorers in the 21st century, are the people who increase our understanding of these places. So how can you become a polar explorer? Study science, study geography, study a field sort of discipline at university. Keep on going.
Yeah, and keep on going. There's lots of there's usually a few people who will say that's a crazy idea, or maybe you could find something that's slightly more comfortable, or maybe you want to work in an office for more of your time. And so I think if it's something that you want to do, then you just keep trying to do it, and eventually everybody gets tired of telling you no, and then people start saying yes.
Yeah. So I think you probably need persistence,
Yes.
curiosity,
Yes.
and a sense of humor.
Yes.
There we go.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Pack those 3 things in your rucksack. Crack on with a field science discipline all the way through university and beyond. And give us a call when you're up here, and we'll meet you for a cup of tea and a biscuit.
Great.
Fantastic. Cindy, that's great to hear that the whole county's been watching in Virginia. I hope the weather's not been too horrible where you've been. If we've got one more question coming up or something. Otherwise, it's a very good goodbye from us. It's been lovely speaking to you all, and look forward to catching up tomorrow.